Okay, it's time for another Pod Bible podcast, and I'm joined today by Dan Snow. Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So, Dan, obviously, a lot of people will be aware of you. You've done all sorts of great work, but we're here today specifically to talk about your podcast, which is, of course, History Hit. It's been going for quite a while. I'm sure you've enjoyed seeing the podcast industry go crazy and every Tom, Dick and Harry get into doing podcasting. But how did your show first come about, and why podcasting?
Yeah, well, it's so weird, isn't it? Like it was in 2015. I'd been working as a TV presenter for 12 years. I was an established, I was making shows on BBC One about the Vikings, big sort of working on the, big national events, anchoring shows, BBC, working on Discovery in the US. So big sort of, so someone sidled up to me, a guy called Dan Morrell, a charity of, a sort of, an event for the Battle of Waterloo 200, so trying to raise awareness of this big battle from British history. And he goes, I've sort of followed your work and think it's really interesting in history. You should look at podcasts. And I was like, podcasts? Like, didn't Ricky Gervais do those in like 2001? Like, I don't, what? Like, I remember, and then I knew that Serial was going bonkers, but I was like, well, what, like Serial? And he was like, yeah, everyone's going to start listening to him. It's going to be really good. So I went away and did a little bit of research and listened to a few little things and rang him up and said, okay, well, I'd love you to do a podcast for me. And do you know what's amazing is those people listening out there who are thinking about doing it is like, I am not someone who likes quoting Chinese proverbs that probably aren't actually Chinese proverbs, probably made up. But I think there's one which really spoke to me, which is the best time to plant a tree is 5 years ago. Like, we can all agree that is like the best time to plant a tree. The second best time is now. Like, we all wish we'd done something 5 years ago. So I remember in 2015 just going, and I started this pod and it went quite well, but I was like, man, I wish I'd known this. It's great. It's self-commissioning. I've got freedom. I'm not going to the BBC going, please, can I make a show about this? And they're like, no, you're an idiot. I just do exactly what I want to do. I mix it up. I mix up formats. Sometimes I'm out on the road. I'm talking to people in museums and members of the public, whatever. Other times I'm sitting in my house talking to a world-renowned historian in America or a civil rights activist or something over Zoom, whatever. I'm like, this is wonderful, but I wish I'd did it 5 years ago. It's so frustrating. I've only got a few thousand listeners. And of course, now I'm sitting here so glad I did start in 2015. And
yeah.
So the lesson is just get out there and start it. And it'll be miserable and embarrassing for the first few weeks and months. You got the little tiny listening figures, but then 5 years down the line you'll be like, oh my god, thank you 5-year-old me. I'm really really glad I did that. And now it's taken over my life. I don't do conventional TV work anymore. I was looking at starting a video channel while I started that podcast, so I merged two together. I've now got the History Hit podcast and then a video, like a Netflix for history, a video documentary channel, which the pod feeds into. It's all really brilliant and mutually whatever. And so I've got this amazing life, digital life. I've had this reinvention in my 40s as a middle-aged bloke. I don't do television anymore. It's been the most extraordinary renaissance for me, and I'm just incredibly lucky.
Brilliant. Okay, and it must be, during the last 18 months that we've had, it must have been amazing to have had all this prepared for you and ready to go, in the sense that you weren't able to go and make TV shows, right? Or unless you were just filming it at home in your office. But podcasting, you just need an internet connection, a microphone, and you can keep going.
No, again, speak about lucky. I just can't imagine what the last 2 years must have been. If I had an old-fashioned job, which was sort of traipsing around various TV broadcasts and begging them to let me do stuff. And also, I'm less attractive now because I'm sort of just a sort of posh white bloke in my 40s. When I was in my 20s rapping about history, everyone thought, well, that's kind of cool. A sort of youngish person knows about history. But now I'm just another of the many boring old men who talk about history all the time, right? So my career, I think, would have... I would have really struggled. I would have gone round and TV died a death last year, and instead it's been some of the most busiest and rewarding time of my life. And also the reactive, as you know, man, the reaction is so great. Like when Afghanistan fell last weekend, it seems so weird saying that, Kabul fell last weekend. We had 2 pods within 2 days. We had the world's great expert William Dalrymple talking about it, and a US guy works at the CIA, works at Barack Obama's National Security Council. Boom, on the pod within 3 days of it happening. That is during COVID. We had really, I don't know. I think we did our best work, and we produced I think quite important content about previous diseases, what happens in previous lockdowns, pandemics, why social distancing, hand washing, how we learned that stuff. Well, we learned it because of previous pandemics. Vaccines, when the vaccine was announced, we had one of the world's leading vaccine historians, like a guy who himself has invented a vaccine for a disease in America, on the pod immediately, and vast numbers of people listened to that. So I don't know. I think it was really special to be part of at that time. And Boris Johnson almost died. Oh well, he was hospitalised with COVID. The UK Prime Minister. We went back immediately and talked to a historian about David Lloyd George being hospitalised during the Spanish influenza, so-called Spanish influenza of 1918, 1920. And we discovered that Lord Salisbury, the Prime Minister in the 1890s, was almost killed in the so-called Russian influenza. So, bringing this context to life, and it just felt like, I don't know, I was not an emergency worker, but it definitely felt like we were able to, in my little corner of the internet, we were able to kind of bring a bit of a long view and a bit of context to what we were all living through.
Yeah, and that's sort of essentially sort of how it started, right? The idea for the podcast in a way is sort of looking at things that are happening right now, and then going back and seeing, similar events in history, what we've learned, what we didn't learn from, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the nice thing, yes, it was. I mean, so I guess my background is my mum and dad are both journalists, so I grew up in a family that was like bonkers about history and news. But so their history though was like they were going out covering war zones and like Sarajevo, and they go out to Rwanda or in the 90s. And so they'd want to know the history of why those things had happened. So I grew up in loving history, but it wasn't like Henry VIII in his codpiece. It was like, so in the Middle East, at what stage did the British and French give backing to the Israelis over the Palestinians? So it's kind of recent history. So I go and study history at university and looked at becoming a historian, sort of thinking about a PhD, and then ended up becoming a broadcaster. And so my love of history is very much from that journalist parents kind of trying to work out what's going on today. So yeah, the podcast initially, I wanted to sit in the space between kind of traditional history and news and current affairs. But I ended up just doing everything, because that's the one thing about podcasts. So I ended up going, actually, no, I'll do a bit of Roman history this week. Let's do it. So I think between you and me, the episodes I enjoy the most are the ones where we do just go, right, something's kicking off. Like this is what, like for, I don't know, the Middle East is a great example, right? The upsurge in violence earlier this year. And I was able to get like 3 or 4 historians on over a couple of weeks, going, right, why? What's going on here? What is the Gaza Strip? Why is there violence in the Gaza Strip? I got a Palestinian historian on, I got Israeli historians on, I got British, I got neutral. So I mean, I got people from other countries. So those are the episodes that I probably enjoy the most. But at the same time, it's really fun. I did one the other day with a brilliant Irish historian. And she just talked me through Louis XIV's mistresses. So we just sometimes do a bit of proper random history where there's no particular kind of contemporary lesson. Although great men and their mistresses is always important and always has context, right? So even when you're talking about like random medieval stuff, you still are thinking, well, it's beginning to sound a bit familiar. There's a few, US presidents and British prime ministers this reminds me of.
Yeah, it's all cyclical. All these things start happening again and again.
They all rhyme.
So I'm guessing that obviously, since we've had the move to having to record so much of this kind of thing over Zoom or over the internet, that's just given you incredible access as well, right? Were you recording a lot of your interviews face-to-face previously, or were you doing internet-based stuff?
Yeah, I was doing I liked face-to-face, and I do miss it. So we went to remote, and the good thing is that people said yes a lot more. So we've been able to get some great people on, and also look at more US stuff, which is important, and some Australian stuff around Captain Cook, particularly talking to some Aboriginal historians about that. So yeah, I do miss. I think we'll go back to we'll go back to a blended work mode. I mean, like everyone,
so.
right?
I hope so.
I hope so. But it'd be nice to. I do find. I mean, you and I are having nice back and forth. I do find. With some academic historians, I like to kind of chip in and make it a bit. They give. I'm like, why did the Second World War begin? And they just give a 5-minute answer. When you're in the flesh, you've got the little ways of sort of interjecting and sometimes a bit of lightheartedness, or sometimes keeping them on course. Or when it's online they can get a bit of a head of steam up, and you kind of have to start waving a bit, and then they think you're mad. But because the back and forward is what makes podcasts, I think, better.
Yes, yeah, no, I agree, and I think particularly, I mean, it's not too bad when it's one-on-one like this, but if you're with two or three people, then yeah, it's much easier when you're in the room together. But I think from our perspective, obviously, this has given us amazing access to some wonderful podcasters here and abroad. And some really big names who definitely wouldn't have taken an hour out of their schedule to come to a studio in London and jump on the tube to come and talk to me. But when it's opening their laptop for an hour, then for an hour, I say for half an hour, 20 minutes or whatever, then it's doable. Yeah, I think you're right. A bit of a blend moving forward will work well.
Because traditionally, did you try and do all yours in person?
Yes, yeah, and that was great. I really enjoyed going. We used to use the Acast studio, and so we'd just invite people. We'd block out an hour or two, and then we'd just have back-to-back guests, and it was great to meet them, have a little chat, get them a drink, and have that little back and forth beforehand before you then press record. You don't do that as much with this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? Yeah, it's a trade-off for the sort of bigger guests, but more, it's easier access and also work-life balance. Quite nice for me not to have to go into London and record with all the guests. I've seen a lot more of my family and stuff. So.
Yeah.
But I'm sure this will echo conversations going up and down the country, whatever career people are in, whatever industry. It's the same. I mean, it is lovely shaking someone's hand and you end up having little creative conversations and find out what they're working on next, and you end up thinking, oh, I might come and film that for the History Hit TV channel, or you do nice little things tend to spiral off when you meet in person. Yeah,
I think so. Great. So before we finish off, you did mention briefly the History Hit network. I just thought it might be great to sort of let people know about that if they're not aware. I'm sure your podcasts are very big and successful, and I'm sure people will have checked it out if they haven't already. Hopefully they'll go and do it after this. But the network, what do you have on there? Is it all similar to kind of podcasts? Is it very varied and different?
For the moment, well, like everyone, everyone's releasing podcasts hand over fist. So we've got a few non-history ones in the pipeline, but at the moment we've released several history ones, and I guess the idea is we've got a brilliant. I mean, it's such a good story. We've got this guy came to us as a graduate, fresh out of uni, called Tristan Hughes. I mean, so passionate and so obsessed with ancient history, and he was just around the office. He was like fixing. I mean, he was literally doing anything, right? Getting the photocopy, helping me the live tour. We'd build a little stage together, and he'd sell the merch afterwards. And eventually, we're like, let's give Tristan a podcast. And so he's done the ancients, and he's built it up. I mean, honestly, he's built it up himself. No media attention, nothing, and it's getting hundreds of thousands of streams a week. It's bonkers. It's one of those great old school podcast stories, and he's coming on leaps and bounds. And then we saw that and thought, well, let's try and sort of do podcasts, specific like history podcasts for each period that people tend to find fascinating. So we've got kind of a military World War I, World War II kind of silo, and then we've got Tudors and Renaissance, and then we've got medieval, and then we've got Tristan. It's obvious stuff, but and the idea that one of those episodes will get played on mine each week, and then mine will kind of sit maybe I don't know. So if you want for like the proper true history fans that want that proper geeky content, they come through mine if you like, and then they get pushed into stuff like deep dives into like crazy medieval or early modern stuff. So that's the idea. And then we're releasing a few more. We'll see. I don't know. Do you think we're reaching saturation now? You tell me. You know more about the market than anyone. What's going on with pods?
I have peaks and troughs. I think there was a moment during the first lockdown when Louis Theroux released his podcast, and I remember seeing that pop up on my phone, and I thought, oh no, now. I mean, great, because it's going to be good and I'm going to want to listen to it. And at least that they're going to be well researched, and they're going to be good interviews, and they're going to be engaging. He's going to get some interesting guests. But I thought now everybody who's stuck at home is going to be releasing a new podcast. And that did sort of come to fruition. You saw a lot of celebrity ones, and a lot of them have either dropped off or some of them have kept going. And I was panicking, thinking, how am I going to keep up with this? But then I was speaking to somebody, I think a friend who works in music journalism, and he was saying, I never panic. I never feel like I need to listen to every album that comes out. I just need to keep across what's going on. I need to be making sure that I'm listening to the big the heavyweights, and then I'm keeping an eye on what's happening in the independents, and that's what we try and do at Pod Bible. Have a good mix, and not think we have to check out everything, because it's insane how many new ones are being released each week.
But do you think that can the audience support new releases? Do you think it's like are more new people coming into it as consumers?
Yeah. I do think so, because again, one of the big complaints of a lot of people have is, it's all the big celebrities coming in and doing it, and they're sort of making it harder for the little guy. But then I think these big celebrities are bringing in these swathes of people who hadn't even heard of podcasting, weren't aware of podcasting, and you think hopefully somebody who comes in and listens to I'm trying to think of like the Gemma Collins podcast or something like that, may well then look on their device and see, if you like this, you might like this, and scroll through the carousel, find something a bit new, and there'll be a little bit of that trickle down effect. I mean, we'll see if that works. That's what I'm choosing to tell myself.
Yeah,
a little bit.
But anecdotally with me, our numbers have gone up. As all of these, I mean, when I started, there was about there were lots of history podcasts, but there were sort of 2 or 3 really big ones. Now there's loads and loads and loads, but it doesn't seem to have hurt my kind of overall listen. I mean, goodness knows, it's a dark art, isn't it, knowing who's listening to what. But it seems like there's plenty of ears out there for everyone to get a share of. So it's nice.
Precisely. Yeah. And even over the weekend, I was at a little kids party, my 5-year-old daughter's kids party, and speaking to people and people saying, "What do you do?" The classic. And I said I work in podcasting, and still had most of the people there saying, "Oh, what's that? What is a podcast?" And obviously, when you're working in it and when you produce one as regularly as you do, you sort of assume that most people may know what that is. So there are a lot of people who haven't heard podcasts yet.
Yeah,
I imagine.
Totally. I mean, I did initially, when I was I started to go for it and say no to a lot of TV work and just get stuck in. I did think to myself, am I like a 42? Like, is this where it ends? I'm a podcaster. I used to, and I remember now, like, it's weird because 2 years later, even 2 or 3 years later, I'm like, yeah, damn right, I'm a podcaster.
Yeah.
I'm like, Barack Obama's a podcaster, bro.
Exactly.
So, like, and
you were there first.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I am certainly a podcaster, and that is fine by me now. So it's funny how it all just changes, and
yeah, there's no shame in it. Giovanna Fletcher, when she was on I'm a Celebrity last year and she won it, she was on there as a podcaster, which I thought was quite a big deal to see that word being used rather than she could have been a host or whatever it is. Anyway, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Dan, for coming on and talking about your show and the network and podcasting in general. It's always it's the kind of conversation I like. So, and you'll be back on a future episode, of course, recommending a podcast that you listen to. But in the meantime, best of luck with it, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me, and best luck to you guys.